This is the Dope Black Dad podcast. My name is Marvin Harrison. I'm over the moon today, first and foremost, because my name nemesis is with me. He's also my spirit animal, my life confidant, my friend. But he's back. I've had 2 episodes, I think, without you, but it wasn't intentional. Do you forgive me?
Yeah, I forgive you. I'm glad to be back. Likewise, all the same sentiments. I feel the same about you.
The thing is that I was speaking to Ralph Little about race, and what I didn't want it to do is end up being a 2 against 1 conversation in case he got indirectly bombarded. It's a very sensitive conversation, so I thought, let's have an intimate moment. And to be honest, it was a very transformative conversation because listening to white people discover racial experiences, in their own lives is really beautiful. And I was, honored that I could help him discover some things. So he's a great guy and now a friend of the show. Did you listen to it, Marvin? Nemesis?
It's on my to-do list. I haven't
okay.
it yet, but it's not because
it's commitment.
I'll get around to it this weekend.
Is there something to do with black men and commitment here that we're going to discuss, or we're going to leave that? And also today, I'm here with Kimberly Campbell. Kimberly, how are you, first and foremost?
I'm really good, thank you. Really
Can I just say something, though? Because you stopped me in my tracks, okay? I was scrolling, minding my own business, okay, on Instagram, which I always do. And then I went on my friend's Taser page. And I was like, oh, hi, Taser, what's going on? You're talking to somebody. It's very nice. And I'm going to say something here, okay? And I'm going to say it contextually in the right way because it's important, okay? Yeah. You are what we consider a light. So when I saw you and you was beaming and I could see what you was, I couldn't hear you yet. I was like, this is something that I'm going to see what's going on. And then my amazing spiritual sense was compounded because what you said in that moment was absolutely spot on. And you were talking about masculinity and you were talking about men and their purpose and focusing on their purpose over falling in love and romance. And if you haven't found your purpose, you have no business being with a woman. And I was just like, I didn't know what I had in my hand, but I dropped it. And I was like, right, who's this? Who's saying this stuff? So thank you first and foremost for joining us. But is there, could you compound and share what that was again in terms of what you meant in that sentiment?
It's basically talking about how the masculine principle is about harnessing their own kind of individuality, identity, consistency in life, and also about the masculine solar principle within them, that ultimately they can be led astray from themselves by delving into things that ultimately are empty, like sex with women and things like chasing money, because ultimately chasing money is also like a lost concept. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you can still feel empty and without your individual self involved in it. So cultivating what your true purpose is, keeping the straight and narrow kind of journey to yourself, and then you can incorporate the romance and everything because you know who you are. And I think with the lack of this happening in society, a lot of relationships are basically very unhealthy, codependent situations where 2 people are not growing, they're not even able to have a healthy relationship dynamic of ultimately understanding what each other needs and what each other wants. So yeah, it's just understanding like that whole dynamic of what the masculine is and what it needs in this life.
It's really powerful. So Marvin, as a Lothario and a deep voice, sexy man, have you found your purpose before you went through connecting with many of our audience members? I'm just starting a rumor, by the way. I don't even know if this is true. I was just making this up.
I think for me, purpose is like a journey. So I think you can find it, but then it's always innovative and you're always growing and developing. Like you only know what you know, and then you learn something else, and then you progress in that direction. And so, for example, with Dope Black Dads, that's helped me discover my purpose or deepen my understanding of my purpose. Working with other fathers, working with other black men. I remember the things that we did last year, for example. We were reading like The Way of the Superior Man. Had a bit of a book club where we all encouraged each other to read it, going through some of the chapters. So things like that, I think it's a continuous journey. It's dangerous, I think, to think that you've got there and you've arrived, and that's it. I'm going to spend the next 60 years here. But you should always look to progress and develop yourself, and that's the journey that I'm on.
Yeah.
That's powerful. So Kimberly, what is the foundation of your teaching? Because for some people it's more spiritual, for some people it's just academic, for some people it's just life experience has whooped them in the arse and they had to go find some answers. What's the basis of your understanding? Because that's not a concept that many women would understand and educate themselves on, but 2, even men don't know, and it's about them.
Primordial experience. Basically, taking my own spiritual journey and put it into practice, and also being able to be aware of what I see on a daily basis and being able to kind of dissect like a relationship problem, what's lacking in that relationship. Because I have kind of like, I'm not going to say I'm an expert because I'm far from it, but I have the understanding of it to a certain degree. So also implementing it in my own life, because ultimately when it comes to me having a relationship, I want a strong masculine man. And masculine isn't in terms of the kind of negative associations we have with masculinity. It's not him being a warrior, and it's not him taking everything on. It's basically him having his own individualistic purpose and path for his own life. His life is not taken up by other things outside of himself. So for what I want, ultimately, if that comes to a point where I have to educate people so the message gets spread, so ultimately I can have a better relationship, then that's great for me. That's more than enough.
Yeah. So when you said that you were single when you do settle down, Marvin's beard twitched. So I think there's something to dig into there in terms of like your understanding and like what you came from in terms of relationship and dealing with masculinity. What was that experience like? What was the impact of dealing with the masculinity in the way that you were historically versus what you're looking for now?
Well, as a single mum, I am a feminine who has to act in masculine energy on a daily basis, consistently. I have to get stuff done. And normally what we'll find in the feminine essence of society, we have a lot of over masculine women, not out of a sense of they have to be like this, but in terms of keeping themselves protected because they've had negative experiences in relationships. So they are in this natural state of not being able to surrender to masculine energy. And ultimately, that's where she feels happiest. Do you know what I mean? So for me, what was the question again? Because I do this a lot. Like, I go in and
No.
forget the original question.
The question was in terms of what your experience with men and masculinity historically, and to get to that understanding.
So because I've been in a masculinized state, when I come into relationships, I've took over masculine role and then haven't felt comfortable in that state. And I'm like trying to wake the masculine up into his kind of essence, but never understanding why it never happened. But you can't have two masculine energies in a romantic duo. You can either swap and change. It's just essence. It's nothing to do with gender, and we have to kind of pass past that. You know, you can have same-sex relationships, but you have a masculine energy and a feminine energy. It's all just energy. But if I'm constantly in masculine state, how can the masculine step up to feel where he's useful? Because ultimately, that's what masculine wants to feel like. He wants to feel like he's of use to you, that he improves your life. But if you're doing everything and you're not being able to allow him to step up, then he's not going to. So in my personal relationships, it's me learning to settle into my own feminine so he can step into his masculine and let him lead.
And Marvin, does that land with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think men and women do tend to be like polarized, and the harmony is in them occupying their own kind of identities. And if you've got two people trying to perform the same role, I do think that can cause conflict. I mean, some people like it, but I think overall it could become toxic. But if the man's able to perform his role, whether that's more dominant, more alpha, more submissive, or whatever that may be, and the woman does likewise, I think that's when you have the harmony in a relationship.
And also you have a lot more like passion in that relationship. Once you have like that dual nature, that give and take, that receptivity and that giving nature of the masculine, because the feminine essence is about receptivity, about receiving, whereas the masculine is about giving. It's the same way of how he has, when he has a child, he wants to give to his child. When a masculine is in his highest form and highest state, everyone prospers who's around him. That's not just his partner, but his children and also his mother and his younger siblings or his sisters and brothers. He wants to give to all of them because he knows who he is and he knows what he wants to give.
But then is there, and I feel like, because I fully understand what you're saying, but I feel like usually when people speak around masculine and feminine energies, there's a determination to miscommunicate and misunderstand intentionally, because it's basically saying that men are and women are, energies are this and that, and you must and this person must. And then does that remove elements of freedom of choice? Or what is the difference between freedom of choice and tapping into this energy from a spiritual point of view?
Well, in terms of how I see it is a relationship, we have areas of life where we feel more comfortable in our masculine. We have areas of life where we feel more comfortable in our feminine essence. So let's say financially, a woman doesn't feel more comfortable in the feminine essence. She wants to be the provider. And it's about having that communication with your partner to go, I feel more comfortable in this state. Are you okay to be more the feminine state? And that's down to like the individual kind of scenarios. And the beauty of this concept is that you can take one issue and dissect it. Where do you prefer to lead and where do I prefer to surrender? And you can base that on children, money, house, like the relationship as a whole. And that's down to the individual on where they feel comfortable.
It's really powerful. I think one of the things that's really loud to me is like, we talk about people that do the work and the internal work and what that actually is versus what we think it is. And it's actually quite horrific, by the way, just so everybody knows. Do it, but it's horrific and it's amazing at the end. But the process is very difficult. If you haven't cried several times in the 7-day week, you're not there yet. In your ideas, as of you, Marvin, in terms of becoming a father, becoming a sexy man for Dr. Dad's podcast, what's your journey in terms of? I'm making you this guy, by the way. So one of us has to be a sex symbol. I've failed miserably, so it's on you right now. So in terms of like your understanding of the work that you need to do, like what did you do before versus discovering that what you needed to do after? What was that journey of like internal work for you?
Good question. I mean, I think for me, life and experiences teach you about yourself. So I think the more things you go through, the more you actually end up learning about yourself, the more you uncover. And so sometimes I might have felt I was a particular way, but a scenario that I put myself in taught me otherwise, essentially. I do think as well with society, especially as black men, if we kind of address that elephant in the room from that context, that there's a lot that we're fighting against anyway. So sometimes I think society can try and take away our masculinity, like it will emasculate us in that sense. And so it doesn't take you long to look on social media or look in the media and just see how black men are regarded and see how that eats away at your masculinity. So it's important that you link up with brothers like we do within Dope Black Dads, that you create those safe spaces where you can energize and recharge one another, because without it, you will kind of die a death. You will be weak and vulnerable. So you need someone to kind of stay around you. Like we're like the 300. Like you need a team around you that when you're weak, your brother to your left and to your right is also defending and supporting you. And that allows you to experience and uncover yourself. And even around fatherhood, I think what I found interesting, I had an experience a few weeks ago where it wasn't an asthma attack, I don't want to exaggerate it, but I had difficulty breathing and I ended up going to A&E.
COVID?
No, it wasn't COVID either.
So clear about that. No.
Yeah. But thankfully, I went to A&E, they sorted me out. I came home, I was fine, but my breath was wheezing and I felt, I didn't feel my best self. But initially, I was adamant that I didn't want my son to see me like that, because in my head, I thought I don't want him to see me weak. But it only took a few minutes for me to sit down and think, but what am I protecting him from? If I try and maintain this image that I'm always strong, that I'm never weak, that I'm never vulnerable, what kind of man will he grow into if he can't see my weakness? So, so I fell asleep. I was sleeping downstairs. I woke up, and he had been watching me for like at least an hour because he was concerned about me. He's concerned about my breathing. He was there playing on his Switch, but he was just kind of watching me and keeping an eye on me. And that for me, that was a kind of heartfelt experience, because I thought, do you know what? Had I chose to hide my vulnerabilities, I'd be protecting him from a part of me that's actually a natural part of men. And again, that's something through being part of Dope Black Dads, being part of that community, I'm more comfortable to do. Whereas before, I'd have been like, nah, let me hide away from him, let me lock myself away in a room, recover, and let him only see the strong man. So yeah, that's
Where do you guys think this comes from, though? Obviously, Kimberly, you experience men, and I'm sure, the culture of men probably gets throws themselves at you on a daily basis. Not only have a context other than just men do that because they have nothing else better to do. That you must experience it from that sense. And we obviously experience it from a peer-to-peer process. Like, that disconnection of, like, accessing the full wheel of who you are and, the emotions that you can. What's the starting point of that? And who owns masculinity as well? I think that's a really important conversation, because like I don't feel like I designed it. I don't think it was designed in my likeness, but it impacts me. So I'd love to know what you guys think.
In terms of the vulnerable, because we have to understand that vulnerability, and this is, I'm going to quote Brené Brown now, to embrace vulnerability means to have courage, yeah, which means to have strength. And courage, because the word cur, I can't remember what language it's from, it represents the heart, yeah? So we have to get past that kind of, oh, to be vulnerable means to be weak. No, to be able to embrace your vulnerabilities means to have the actual utmost strength, more than most. I still struggle with vulnerabilities of things. But in terms of the who gives masculinity, in a sense, is that what you're trying to say? Who labels it?
Who created it? Who's the one that is the purveyor of it? You know, I feel like I'm a consequence of masculinity. I don't ever consciously believe I was raised in a matriarchy. I don't think I've consciously ever sat there and designed what men means. I am the consequence of what. But who started the concept and the almost the execution of it?
Masculine energy is within us all. It's in women, it's in men. It's the difference between doing and being. Being is being feminine. Being is receptive. Doing is giving. It's the difference in that. So it's kind of like, okay, in a dating scenario, a guy will lead, he will ask to go on dates, he will go into his masculine, it will throw it off in a sense if a woman would be like, do you want to go out for dinner at 8 p.m? Like, some women like that, that's great. Like, I wouldn't feel comfortable in that. But there's nothing, it's not a label, it's just an energy. And men prefer to act out of their masculine and sometimes feel uncomfortable with being in their feminine. And sometimes their courage needs to be in their feminine state and being okay with that, because every man has the feminine principle within them. But the feminine principle is normally his courage to be vulnerable in that feminine space. So when you're saying how you felt you was weak because, you know, normally you're the strong one, like you were having a feminine moment and you probably didn't feel comfortable in that because you don't want other people to see you in that. But to have strength in being okay in your feminine, it shows like your son that it's okay to not be in that masculine really strong. And I find it really attractive when a man is okay in his feminine, because that's when he is okay with feeling, because the negative masculine principle doesn't want to feel. It's emotionally unavailable. It's always in the acting principle, and it's not okay with receiving and giving like love and positive or negative emotion. It just doesn't want to feel. So it's being okay in the balance of both, but then feeling comfortable to be like, I'm okay with my feminine principle, but being able to act it out in my masculine action. Do you get what I mean? Is this making sense?
Yeah. Marvin, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think back to the point I made about being a black man, I feel like there's another additional like kind of juxtaposition, because there are parts of life where you need to be strong, and where being vulnerable and having that feminine energy or having that vulnerability could be a weakness. And it could be a weakness where if we're looking at things like white supremacy or systemic racism, that it's not the moment to be weak. And I think sometimes that's where men get caught out as well. Can
I please retrain? Don't say it's weak. It's just vulnerable.
Sure.
It's just vulnerable. It's the ego. Yeah. It's the ego that labels it as weak. It's not weak.
No, I get it. I guess what I mean is in terms of in like a racist scenario.
Yeah.
That's where you wouldn't want to show that vulnerability or that weakness.
Yeah.
Because then, you know, who knows what the outcome would be. Like we saw the thankful verdict, for example, with George Floyd. And what happened in that situation. Today, people are memorializing Stephen Lawrence. And so you think back to scenarios like that, and I think one of the challenges in being a black father, and especially raising sons, you consider that in certain circumstances, I need my son to be strong. And strength is sometimes walking away, or knowing what to say, or knowing how to defend yourself. It's not just in a physical sense, but it's also in an emotional and an intellectual way. But I feel like that's the additional burden that sometimes we carry, but we don't know when to switch it off.
Yeah,
that can be the problem, that we walk around with that militant battleground face 24/7.
It's a hypersensitive, hyper-aware state. Hypersensitive. But it's also...
I think what's really... Sorry, no, I just think what's really interesting is that I feel like we've never really... Masculine has already existed, and it's been within us innately, but ultimately constructs around us change the understanding and the implementation of masculinity. So how to express it when you're being oppressed, when you're enslaved? How do you express your true, authentic self and access those energies? Because the whole point of it was stripping, a lot of that power away from us. So I think the legacy of that has changed our proximity to masculinity in its purest sense. And I think it's funny because I'm in South Africa now, and there's a deep connection to spirituality, which actually erodes a lot of nonsense that comes out of the mouths of, some of the Western people. They just have zero tolerance for it. It's just like, because they know the depths of their connection to themselves. It can't be confused with like, I'm better than you because, language or possessions. They will talk about more spiritual things to each other. And there's still very unhealthy behaviors that have been generated. And so I think in many ways, as a consequence, they've picked and designed certain parts of masculinity that they decided to embellish over others. And some of those things are now unhealthy. But fundamentally, some of the kind of like day-to-day stuff that goes on that usually like confuses us. Like I even look at what happened with George Floyd and how we feel about it. I think in many ways, like we're a consequence of an environment where that information is presented to us in a particular way constantly. So like how it lands here is completely different. I haven't seen it on the news as much at all. Like it's a fractious byline in comparison, because the priority here is obviously local market, surrounding nations, other big African nations, and a little bit here and there, but that's not the bread and butter of what it is. So how I'm then conditioned in the environment, the context of blackness right now versus maybe you guys is completely different. And I think that's something to really like to take in stock. Our environment shapes what we understand masculinity to be. You have to almost disconnect to get that understanding.
And that's why you have to tune out from my original video, is you have to step away from the outside you to look within yourself, and because the reality outside of yourself is so distracting from the inner you that you can go through life and not actually know who you are, because your reality is trying to tell you who you are. And this is where the distraction of, if we use women for an example, like I'm not saying it's like we have some men who are so distracted by a very attractive woman that they don't actually know what they want from a woman. In a female, they just see the body, they just see the face, and they're not looking at the inner parts of her, because how can they look at the inner parts of her if they haven't been willing to do the journey of the inner parts of themselves? So being able to have the kind of go, no, I'm not taking this into my reality right now because it's physically not in my present. And we also have to understand that is our present moment is our only moment to truly live. So when we're sitting there and we are constantly taking in trauma, we're putting our body into a constant state of hypersensitivity, hyper-awareness, and we're reprogramming our brain consistently to be, we have to protect ourselves, we have to do this, we have to do that, because what we're taking in is a program. Like, it is happening. Like what's happening in the world is happening, but for your own sanity and for your own individualized kind of like, the body is a learning device at the end of the day, and you have the emotional body. Whatever you're taking in, the emotional body is going to react. And if you create those pathways consistently by what you take in, then that's going to change your reality, and you're going to project that reality consistently out in the world. So people who, like yourself, live in South Africa probably don't live in a hyper-aware, oversensitized state, because their life is a lot calmer by what they take in their reality as well.
So then, in terms of ultimately, our platform is always about fighting for, driving a conversation around fatherhood, masculinity, mental health, blackness, and in terms of, progressing that conversation, but also being finally attuned into what you're internalizing. What's the balance when you have a mission? I think that's a really important thing, because we banned some of the really unhealthy, you can't share someone dying or being murdered by police or black people fighting or those types of things in the group, because I think it makes everything very much hyper visual and hyper internalized.
Low vibrational.
So what's the barrier? What's the gap between what you internalize to educate yourself versus what you internalize to feel, and actually the impact that it has? I think both of you really, because I think it's important.
Having that balance between, I have enough energy to take this on, and when that energy has been drained, to step back and recharge within yourself. Because I do think it's important, like, if you are constantly in a drained state, you're not helping anyone. And that's ultimately the thing where you come first in your reality. But with, like, I don't necessarily talk too much on race. So it's something where I try to stay away from, because I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to say anything that's too, because I don't know the words and all that stuff. So I don't want to
can I assert a viewpoint that you have?
Yeah.
Is it the viewpoint that race is a low common denominator in terms of us as people, and so when we acknowledge it in a particular way, we disconnect? Am I anywhere near something?
I think what I'm starting to realise, last year, and this is where I'm going to get really emotional, because it's really touching upon something that really shone into my own reality. When the thing happened with George Floyd, I was fighting the world, and it was showing up in my workplace as people making certain comments, and I had to perpetually take the responsibility of, I'm adding fuel to this fire, and it's showing up in my reality, and it's making my life hard. And I didn't have the emotional strength to consistently fight that fight. If I see it in my reality, in the present moment, I will fight, but I do not have the energy as one individual to change the world. And I think,
can I just say that
where it starts is with us, within us, within focusing more on the part, because it's kind of like, it's like the mind. What you focus on, you attract. If we're constantly focused on the negative aspects of race and the negative disconnections of race, I would rather sit in my reality and appreciate the beautiful moments where two races come together. I don't promote anything to do with race anymore. I talk about present connection. It doesn't matter what colour, and that's just my personal preference, because that's where I feel at my most positive, best self.
So, you said something really important and really powerful, and so obviously we've been doing this work now for 3 years, and in many ways my lived experience as a black man has been very loud in terms of racial identity and what that means, but also what that means to be a black male and other intersections that I represent. What's super interesting is that I've realized that it's almost a game and a circus that operates at a particular frequency, and it's an unwinnable conversation in every single sense, and there is no completion, there is no growth in it, there is no answers in it. It's almost like, what would you do if there's a psychosis of experience of people just doing things that you don't agree with, there's no connection point, they're not listening to you, and you then try to jump in and be like, hey guys, stop the circus. And the part of the circus isn't just the things that happen on the ground, because that's very real to the people who are impacted, that's in their present. I'm saying the conversation that comes off the back of those experiences are incredibly performative. So this week, I broke my own rules and I went on BBC News after declaring I'm not going on any more news channels. They romanced me. I was moved. I felt something. I felt like my tone of voice was at that point, important or needed or could add value. So I go on and I do it. And I immediately was just like, there was no value there. There was no answers there. I just served something greater than me that I have nothing to do with. And no change will be made off the back of it. Now, there were a couple people reached out and were like, wow, that was great, amazing. But the fundamental work is like when I stand in rooms in my full power, I change the conversation immediately.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that now for about 12 years or 15 years in my career and different parts of my life. I get more power and in change in that than I do by saying something really dope on the radio that people may applaud, but ultimately it doesn't change the conversation, doesn't change the outcomes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say off the back of that, Marvin, I think the point you made in terms of sometimes using that anger or frustration to educate us as well is really important, because it can dictate how you channel that. And I think, Kimberly, on your point, I think, for example, with a network like Dope Black Dads, we can be vulnerable to one another, but then that's where the support comes. And so it's almost like a cycle. You don't expect everyone to be on their A game 24/7, but then when someone does fall down, you've got your brothers and you've got other people beside you to help lift you up. And I think sometimes that perspective is important, that, yeah, you can be vulnerable, but you need to choose who you're vulnerable in front of, because other people may take that as a weakness. Another point as well from something that Marvin was saying that it reminded me of, there was a book that I read a few years ago by Mark Manson called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And that's something I've just channeled. Like, we've got a certain amount of fucks we can give, a certain amount of things. Sorry for people that may be offended with me swearing, but we've got a certain amount of things we can care about. But outside of that, we can't care about every single thing that's going on. So we need to choose what we care about, where we focus our energy very carefully, because we don't want to waste it. And like Marvin said, we don't want to spend it in areas where it's going to add no value. We'd rather redirect that into our in our groups, in our communities, into our families, where it does matter and where it will have
and present reality.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's really interesting is that, and I spoke about this maybe 2-3 weeks ago, but I went through this whole phase of like testing my reality for sport, because I felt like I had the skills and the power to change things and change people. It's like, oh, you're challenged? Come around, have a seat. What do you know? And like work them through and coach them through particular scenarios, because I was like, I have some skills, I know some stuff, I'll share it with you. And what really quickly started to happen is my whole world was surrounded by challenged people.
Yeah.
And which is fine in many ways, but ultimately I became a source of comfort or a source of something that they needed to connect to and have affinity to. And then what ended up happening is just like weird things were happening, like just almost violent experiences were occurring. And I'm just sitting there like, where did that come from? And it's happened so much now, and it lasted so long, by the way. So don't ever do this. This is a bad game. Learn from me. It went on for so long. The legacy of it still is in now. It's around now. And you think about what the impact of my ego saying, yo, I can help people and I know some stuff and I can share with you. And it's like, I wasn't even focused on my goal. I wasn't focused on my purpose. That's specifically why what you said resonated, because I was doing things like I had completed the universe, like I'd done it, clocked it, I'm out. And I hadn't. I had so much things to do, so much work to do. And rather than sitting around and standing in a space that ultimately is not going to yield anything, I should have just continued on my mission and just been when I did enter their spaces, I entered in a very powerful way that was to add value and then continue what I'm doing, rather than this idea that I knew it all. This is why the ego is fundamentally dangerous. Do you have an understanding of ego and what the role it plays, Kimberly?
Beautiful understanding of it. Okay. Do we want to go really deep?
Let's land, man. I think people are here. We've bridged them in nicely. We're here now.
So, when you are between the age of 0 and 7, and this is why it's very important for this obvious, for this platform as well, to understand children as well, and where the ego comes from. Between the age of 0 and 7, children are in theta brainwaves. It's kind of like a constant download state, and through those experiences on survival, which is to do with the lower 3 energy centers of the body, the ego is created. So from these 3 lower centers, which is to do with security and family, the second one is to do with the sacral chakra, is to do with like intimacy and relating, and also like sexuality comes from there. And then the third one is to do with your own self-confidence and also money accumulation, and also what we eat, what we intake into the body. The 3 energy centers that are obviously create the emotional body, because we have to be aware of when the ego is reacting. The ego is reacting from the physical emotional body, which is the feeling that you get inside yourself. So the ego is kind of like the parent you feel you never had, that's trying to protect you and to keep you in survival. And our whole journey is to get above that. Because if we are constantly within survival state, we are not accessing the beautiful spiritual states of love and understanding and sight. And, you know, with the throat chakra, we have to access the 4 highest chakras to know who we truly are, and to know who we truly are, and to know what our true purpose is. Now, I have a theory. I don't know how I have a theory in terms of black men being kept in a state of survival to keep them in those lower egoic states, so they are not able to access who they truly are on a higher spiritual, physical reality level. Because if you're always in that hyper aware state, you're not in these higher 4 chakras of yourself. Does this make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
it does.
And so for children, their ego is basically created from their experience. If you had a parent who killed your confidence as a child, like, you will probably grow up and want to kind of have money or have things to adorn yourself with to add to your confidence, but ultimately it's empty because it's not who you truly are. It's out of the ego.
Do you feel like, because this is really interesting for me at this point, in terms of one of the tools that I start using is asking myself, how can I be of service to this situation? And when you think about how you serve, you remove expectation. This works for me. Yeah. I remove expectation of the situation, and then I become less concerned about the outcome, looking good, avoiding looking bad, and move more into this space of like, actually, what can I add to this? And sometimes, and maybe this is where I think I additionally went wrong. There's a lot of wrong going on. Is allowing people to give me a narrative and just accept it. Like, it's fine. It's unwinnable. It's fine. But then what I realized is that it was creating a reality around me in terms of how people thought things was going versus what like my test of reality is like language and touch. So if I say something, that's what I mean. Because I actually have integrity, and I don't say things I don't mean to like fill space. So if I tell you I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there. But what happens is that when I allowed too many people to share my narrative on my behalf, I was coming up against people's perception. It was like, well, I heard this over here and I never challenged it. So then I'm dealing with that now in my present. And I have a rule of not to over-engage anyway. But then I realized that it was starting to shape the work that we do, because ultimately this is a perception framework. Like, how we are seen matters.
The world is an entire perception. Everyone's individual reality is a different perception based on their experience. But the only way to get out of that is to get out of the ego mind and get into the present moment. And instead of reacting to life, is being aware, sometimes not even speaking, just listening. Like, when we walk past a tree, we don't go, oh, that's a tall tree, that's a short tree, that tree has no leaves. We just go, it's a tree. And having that awareness to not have to judge or change anything in that moment is to have true awareness in that present moment. And that's when you're truly out of ego. It's when you don't feel the need to change anything. You're not reacting to life, you're responding with it. And that's the state that everyone needs to be in, because then we will actually create that beautiful give and take and receptivity between each individual, and we are out of our own perception of it and into the reality of it.
Marvin, where are you, brother? I feel like I know you're in the room with this. What's your thoughts?
I agree. I like the theory. I don't know if you heard the theory before, of the 3 ego states. So you have like the ego, the id, the ego, and the super ego.
Yeah.
And like it's often described as like the angel and the devil on your shoulder. But you should have the rational mind in the middle to make the right decision. And I think, Kimberly, that's exactly kind of what you've said, that we perceive everything, but that we internally, because of how we've developed ourselves, we know how we're going to respond. And you've almost anticipated the response ahead of time. And that's what keeps you kind of mellow in the situation. Because we've all been there where situations are trying to draw you out or trying to bring the worst out in you. And that will be the ego telling you to act in a particular way. But then you think it through and you think, is this the best course of action? or is there another way for me to handle it? And often, you know, Marvin, you'd know as a strong black man and with a deep voice as well, that in environments, if you act on that in that perceived way, that could be seen as a negative. However, if you chose to construct your words in a different way or frame, you know, your sentence in a different way, then it can be received, it can land well, it can be received positively. So I do think, yeah, you feel it, you sense it, but you make the right choices. Whereas if you allow it to control your choices, then it's going to control your outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think where my ego is really loud right now, and I'm in like two days a week therapy right now, so I'm fully like in these conversations right now, is almost just this idea of like, I feel like, I mentioned earlier about being a concept. It really disturbs me. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. And I feel like you just get dehumanized in many ways of your actual lived experience, who you are and what you're doing, because of the concepts that fly around. And I think the thing that keeps me stuck is that I had a desire for affinity to people and affinity to a group of people, which then kept me in that environment, which ultimately is unhealthy. But I think there is something, the process of escaping the realm, some people call it 2D understanding, to escape that realm is a lot of work, because you then have to detach yourself from the idea that half this stuff has meaning. Like half of the things that are happening are real. So when someone says something might be happening down there, your instinct is like, I gotta figure that out, because I don't want to be sleeping and then someone like kidnaps me and pushes me in my face. So you start coming up with things and you start reacting based on what you think is going to happen.
Yeah.
When the actual test of reality is your door's locked. There's no one there.
Yeah.
And, you know, Marvin does taekwondo, so he could whoop someone's ass. Like, whatever the thing is, see, I'm just making sure people love you as much as I do. And I think the key thing is that disconnect from making yourself, like, human in that way is a part of the work. And you land at a place where you can accept. It is a part of, like, how can I serve? But it's also this idea that, like, you're not a concept. You're not something that people have imagined in their head. That's not you. And that disconnection is really, really difficult. I found it quite difficult over the last 5 years to really accept and take punches.
I can speak on a personal level with that. Like, when obviously, and this is the part and parcel of creating like a platform, you get known for your platform and you get known as that kind of identity. And that's really overwhelming, because depending on what people project onto that identity, if they project it onto you and you're like, I'm Kim. I'm not this super spiritual guru. I'm just Kim. And having awareness, and this is where some people's egos can run away with that and go, yeah, I'm this person, when you're not. Ultimately, it's just a concept. And I literally, that resonates with me so much. And this is something where it's kind of like being aware of your own awareness of that. It's really difficult if you don't have that knowledge. So, and I think you can apply that to everything in life. It's so wild.
So, and this is you now, because you're in your ascension in terms of people's awareness of, you know, your way of being and the gift that you have. How have you dealt with the transition from being, you know, nice lady Kimberly, who's a mother, into people like following you and engaging to every single word you say and doing that? What's your way of dealing with it been?
Life hasn't changed. Like, for me, life hasn't changed. Like, for me, it's just like, right now I'm just having a conversation. I don't think too much about it. It just is in the moment. Like, I'm having a conversation and I'm able to surrender and let it go and let it do its thing. If it does fantastic, it does fantastic. If it doesn't get much traction, it doesn't. Like, I don't really add much else onto things. I do try to live in the present. Like, obviously with relationships, it's a completely different vibe, because I can overthink honestly. But in terms of my own individual, I'm very self-aware anyway, and I always have been, and it can show up as like social awkwardness. But this is a completely different story to do about astrology. I have something in my chart that speaks of that. But long story short, it hasn't changed. Like, I still respond to people. I still want to create little beautiful connections. I still have conversations. Like, it's other people that project an image of how they think they should be onto me. And that's what I have to correct. That's what I find.
And then what's the process of doing it? Because I know we're talking about we've talked about it, but in practical senses, so even in a relationship sense, you have a knowing of the level of connection and the meaning that a relationship can have. Two individual whole people coming together. You have the information, but the experience of it, I assume, whether it's your inner child theory or whether it's your like human self really trying to like claw at this other understanding while you're just trying to like hang out with someone and have some company, is telling you all these messages. In real practical senses, how does that land for you, and how do you deal with it?
In terms of relationships, it's very much like I can't tell someone else to be self-aware and to learn all this information. That's ultimately up to them and what they decide to do. The only thing that I can control is how I respond to a dating scenario. So if I feel triggers coming up, I take myself away, I deal with the trigger, and then I communicate about it afterwards. I probably let them know how I was feeling. And that's the thing, I don't blame. I try not to, I stay away from blame, because blame doesn't help anything. It's just projecting your inner feelings outwards, when really it's your feelings, it's your responsibility to really deal with that present moment wise, and then communicate afterwards. Because ultimately it's no one else's responsibility to deal with your trauma. It's your responsibility. So it's being aware, and this is why it's a very slow process, especially in relationships and getting to know someone. You shouldn't be jumping into a relationship, because ultimately if you have triggers, that other person's going to have triggers. And having like conversations to get to know each other on a real individualistic level, to know where both your strengths and your weaknesses are. That's what I want to do in my personal preference in relationships, is don't get lost in the illusion of the connection. Just find out about the individual. How do they go about their lives? How do they treat their family? How do they treat their responsibilities? How do they lead their own purpose? Because those are the things that are ultimately going to matter to the longevity of your relationship. It's not the romantic aspect and all that, or obviously the chemistry is really important. But when we get to the reality of things, is how is this person going to show up in their own life so they can show up in mine too? Because someone doesn't know how to show up in their own life and deal with their own stuff, they have no business trying to deal with your stuff either. Yeah.
Marvin, how do you deal with the women in your life?
I think Kimberly hit the nail on the head. I think self-awareness is key, and having that non-judgmental attitude. And I think it's important. Like for me, what I try and do is have conversations with people and see where they're at. So knowing that it's a journey. If you can broach certain subjects, you can bring certain things up, and if you see that someone's kind of got a disdain to it and they've got more of a fixed mindset and not a growth mindset, then you have to politely step away, and even if it's a friend, step away and kind of make your apologies, because I think it's that lack of growth that's really, really worrying. Like if you're not moving forward, you're dying, you're stagnant.
Do you know what the most... Sorry. You know the most beautiful thing about this growth journey anyway, and the healing journey, is when you change, your reality changes, and you'll normally find that the people who will manifest into your life will be on the same ascension level as you.
Yeah, definitely.
That you attract what you are. So you don't have to necessarily worry too much about whether someone's done the work or not. Because the more I've done the work, the quality of connections that are coming into my life are of a much better spiritual level anyway. So you are what you attract. Keep that as like a core message, is if you want better, be better.
And then I suppose what I'm trying to get to the grit of is people who haven't done any work. And I even hate saying that because it makes it sound like it's like getting your nails done. But like people who haven't entered that realm or haven't had the event that's made them dig a bit deeper. I almost want to speak to how difficult it is, but also the value on the other side, like really explicitly. Because I want it to land for people that... And also, like, even how do you even discover, like, it's describe the work? Because I think even that's quite conceptual and mystical in terms of, like, you know, what do I do to myself? But, like, and I'll say this for myself, mine is about, you know, therapy twice a week and trying to understand the root of my behaviors and clear any time my, like, human being jumps out and tries to, like, return me to my child state. I have to understand that and work through that. the things that impact me emotionally, that cause an adverse reaction that I don't believe is inside my values, what are those things? I have a medium who is slightly more spiritual, but we connect on a different level in terms of understanding where my energy sources are. I do have a psychologist. I haven't spoken to her in a couple of months, but like she's incredible at terms of just like what happens on a structural level, group level, and really clears my mind about what's real and what's not, and you know, things, even the language that I then adopt to kind of like survive situations. She helps me with that. So in many ways, like I have that team, but I am always in work in progress. Like there's times where I feel like I'm flying, which was basically most of 2019. And then there's times where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is whooping my ass, which is basically the last 6 months. And so, you know, is there anything you can add in terms of that experience of developing yourself?
Everything happens in cycles. So you're talking of like right now, the last 6 months have felt hard. If it's not hard at moments, you're not got the opportunity to grow. And the hard moments are where you grow anyway. You can either treat it as when an experience shows up, you learn from every experience, and you can just be aware on that level. You can delve deeper as to why you felt like that when you actually start sitting in your emotional body and being aware of what you actually feel. Don't analyze it. Don't get in the mind and analyze how you feel. Genuinely just feel it. How do you feel? Being aware of how you feel. And then you can get deeper and go, why do I feel like this? And it's being able to go down deeper in the layers in those present moments when those experiences come up. That's how I learn personally. I learn in the moment, in the present moment. I read, I grow. And to be honest, when you start seeing the growth that it produces in your life, you start getting addicted to the experiences of growth. Now I'm at the state of addiction to growth and healing. But when you're in those moments, because when you get to that state, you'll find the more triggering subjects will start coming up in your life. And that's where it gets hard, when it really touches upon the really vulnerable parts of you and things like that. But I think it's just about living your experience and trying to learn from it and going, what have I done in the past? What blockages do I keep coming up against? And where do I want to do better? And where do I want to kind of go through it so I don't have to deal with that cycle over again? Because what I do find spiritually, if you haven't got past the cycle, it's going to show up again and again and again and again until you finally learn from it and go, no, I'm not going to do that again. And this is where for men, ultimately, women are always that test. Women are such a test for men. And normally you'll find the problems come up when they can't get out of that cycle to do with women. And I'm not talking about the wife, like the actual one that you want to spend the rest of your life with. I'm talking of these low-level, low-vibrational connections that you're not able to step away from.
That sounded a bit mad, I'm not gonna lie. I liked it and I wanted to clap, but I was like, I don't know if I want that soundbite next to my name. Low vibrational, oh my, I can't even say it. My mouth is, I'm like,
low vibrational. Why is it low vibrational? Because it's led by the body and desires and you don't care about the person. When you are having sex from such a low vibrational desire state and not for anything higher than just to have a release and a feeling, it's low vibrational. It doesn't add to your life. It just takes away.
How does that, look at me now, look. How does that work when we talk about other different types of relationships? When people say they're like polyamorous or, polygamy and different types of frequency, is it the purpose that negates that in terms of it being a low vibration? Or is it just that, having that much? So there's a concept in Western Superior Man is about depletion, which do not deplete. And I was like, this is a genius idea, because obviously you're like, I'm a loving person. I feel like I'm an incredibly loving person. I give so much. I love connecting with people. I love loving people. It's great for me. But I used to love to depletion. And then I'll be like, why am I so tired? Why am I so uninspired? Why do I need to nap right now? Why am I sad? And it's because I gave too much away. I didn't use the muse or the visual of a beautiful woman as a way to like fuel my purpose and energize me. I try to like clip the flower from the stem and take it home with me and be like, I must have this person because they make me feel so good. Like, is there something connected there?
Can I ask you a question?
Always.
Where does love come from in terms of the body?
I've always seen it like my stomach, to be honest, like my lower regions of my stomach. I don't know why.
What organ? What organ?
Well, it comes from the heart.
Yeah. Love does not come through the genitals.
We're going to leave that to pan out. Can you just repeat that very quickly for the men that use their genitals? And I'll tell you a quickly story from South Africa afterwards. Just repeat that, sorry.
Love does not come from the genitals, it comes from the heart. So if we're showing love, apparently, with the genitals, we have a negative association with what love is and how to give it.
It's powerful.
Because sex is about relating.
And I'm with you. And I think what my question was about the depths of people who are polyamorous believe they can fall in love with multiple people at the same time, and they think it's possible. And then they do engage in that in a physical act, but also in an emotional act. So it's almost has integrity to it. It's not just a man who's going around cheating. But what happened so I was in South Africa and we were holding an event called the Embassy, which is like a pop-up members club. And we had this amazing woman called Thokozani who came and joined us. Like I can't explain her, but like incredible person, incredible energy, and has like the mind. So we're holding circles. We're doing introductions, by the way. This is like, hi, my name is Marvin. I'm an Aries, and I'm the founder of Dope Black, and I like biscuits. Yeah, and she's like, my name is Thokozani, and men are full of shit, and men think that they can solve all problems of the world with their dicks, and just dropped it in the middle. Now, I sat there and I was like, I actually crossed my legs because it landed somehow, and I was like, oh, like it's like other things as well. But there's this kind of real awareness where like that's been used as a tool, as a way to soothe and like solve problems. Like in Baby Boy, when Tyrese hits his woman in the face and then eats her out as a way of like, oh, it's okay because I ate you out. Like, you know, we feel that we can solve those things. I feel like that's largely where there's such a huge disconnection between masculine and feminine energies at this time, in terms of like, I can fuck this away. This is a concept that I believe is my dick is going to solve peace for women.
Yeah.
Is that how you operate, Marvin?
No, not at all. But I think you're completely right. You even see, you know, we touched on slavery before, but even how when they emasculated men, that was something they did. They would castrate men, and they would take away what they, you know, would perceive to be the man's manhood. And even down to warfare, you know, people would see that as an extension of a man's genitals, you know, whether you're using a gun, whether you're using a tank, using a missile. So I think, yeah, definitely, I think men have gone around all throughout the world and tried to exert their dominance in that way, and raped and pillaged, you know, the African world pretty much. And you know, they've bastardized the world in that respect, with no consequence as well. And so, yeah, I completely believe that, how can I put it like that, that element of what would be perceived to be masculinity or toxic masculinity has been misused. And going back to what you said at the start, I think people have used it as a definition of masculinity, that it's about how many women you've been with, or it's about how strong you are, or how much money you have, and all of these things, which can be seen as toxic traits, as opposed to how comfortable you are, as Kimberly's been saying, operating in your masculine energy, but also allowing a woman and feeling comfortable with a woman operating in her feminine energy, and you being able to do likewise and reciprocate. So I think, there has been a warped perception of what manhood is, and unfortunately that trickles down through media, through social media. And I was thinking, as you both were speaking, especially being locked down and being stuck in our houses, we've lost that human connection, we've lost that interaction where you would have learned and grown and kind of learned about yourself through others. And because we've been force-fed media, unless we switch it off, it's really warped our perceptions of our reality, and that's something we need to switch off.
That's powerful, man. Guys, thank you so much. We've done a power hour. It wasn't. It went way longer than I thought it was going to go. I'm very present, and I almost now want to continue this conversation, but we don't.
I want to say.
I feel like we can all do a slightly closing statement in terms of just like key takeaways that you want people to really resonate with, or books and resources to go and look into. Do you want to lead, Kimberly?
Obviously, The Way of the Superior Man, massive, massive book. That's obviously a lot, because the research that I was doing naturally on the subject, it was like The Way of the Superior Man really filled in the gaps for me. Because there's so much we could talk on. We could talk about like when a feminine gets into a succubus state, the unconscious succubus state. There is so much. But ultimately understanding, the main thing that I want people to understand is masculine energy is the ability to contain something. He contains a relationship. It's called like positive ownership of a relationship. And I think a lot of feminine women have an uncomfortable relationship with masculine containment and healthy containment. And they have to have a better relationship with masculine containment in terms of he looks after, he buys the house, he contains the family home, he supplies the money in a sense, and where she settles into her feminine and she gives the gifts of her love and her nurturance to the relationship. It's a give and take thing, but masculine is more practical, feminine is more emotional. It can swap and change and it can ebb and flow. But ultimately, masculine is the containment. And I think we need to understand and redefine what it is, because at the moment, masculine is being very portrayed as negative, as toxic. And there is toxic masculinity out there. But we also have to take accountability on the feminine side of it, where we're not acting out of a wounded feminine state as well. There's work to be done on both sides, not just the masculine.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard act to follow, but I'll try. No, I'll try. I'll do my best. But no, I was going to say, I think networks are so important. You know, we can't be strong 24/7. You need to surround yourself with people that can support you. Don't be afraid to show your vulnerabilities and ask for help. I think what saddens me is the amount of black men, and men in general, but black men specifically, that struggle and suffer health issues, you know, mental issues, relationship problems, all these types of things, because in our heads, or what society's told us, is don't be a simp, don't be a beta male, don't be weak, and all of those things are misconceptions. And if you need help, reach out, get help. You've got people around you, there are networks, there are organizations that can support you, and there's no need to suffer in silence. Even down to things like prostate cancer, you know, black men don't want to get checked because of the connotations men have had with someone sticking a finger somewhere and that being seen as negative. But yet, exactly, you got the PSA test. Exactly, and things like that, and the reality is we die, and we die in abundance, and it even hurts for me, like thinking about DMX passing away at 50 and Prince Philip dying at 99. Like there's a stark contrast there in terms of the life expectancy that black men have, and that's something that I feel like we can improve if we work together and support one another. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. I love conversations that flow, and obviously it's first conversation. It's kind of like, yeah, me getting used to it, but I loved it.
Thank you, brother. Wow. I look forward to seeing you. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That's okay. Thank you.